Ella didn't cry the day Joshua left. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't even ask where he was going. Because truth be told, she already knew. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't a fight. And it definitely wasn't sudden. What broke their marriage wasn't loud. It was quiet. So quiet, you could miss it if you weren't paying attention. But Ella had been paying attention for years. She noticed the silence at breakfast. The way Joshua scrolled through his phone instead of looking at her. The way his eyes didn't light up when she walked into the room. And maybe worse, the way hers didn't either. They had become strangers. Two people sharing the same roof, but living in separate worlds. There were no slamming doors, no ultimatums, just a slow, invisible drift, like a boat slipping away from shore, inch by inch until you look up one day and realize you're alone. It didn't start this way. 10 years earlier, they were the couple that made people believe in forever. They had met at a concert in downtown Phoenix, sweaty and sunburned, dancing like teenagers under the desert sky. They laughed, they dreamed, they made plans. They were in love, real love, but love. Love doesn't disappear in a day. It fades, not with drama, but with dishes left in the sink, with skipped goodnights, with birthdays that start to feel like obligations instead of celebrations. Ella used to count the hours until Joshua came, home. Now she counted the ones he wasn't there. Do you know what it's like to sit across from someone you once loved and feel absolutely nothing? No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. That's how Ella felt every evening. And Joshua? He felt it too, but neither of them spoke it aloud. Because how do you tell someone, I don't love you anymore, without tearing both of you apart? So they kept going. They took out the trash. They fed the dog. They paid the bills. They even smiled in photos. But behind those smiles was a marriage on life support. Until one morning, something shifted. Ella woke up. Not with clarity, not with rage, just with certainty. She walked into the kitchen, poured her coffee, and looked at Joshua. And in the quietest voice she said, I think we're already over. Joshua didn't answer right. Away. He just nodded. No protest, no denial. Because deep down, he had known it too. And that was the most painful part. Not the end, but how long they had lived in it, without even noticing. Ella moved out first. Not with boxes and chaos, but with calm, quiet, almost peaceful. She packed a suitcase, a few clothes, her favorite mug, a single photo, the one of her and Joshua, taken 5 years ago at Lake Pleasant. They were laughing in that picture, really laughing. She stared at it for a long time before tucking it in her bag. She didn't want the house, didn't want to fight for furniture or argue over who got the blender. She wanted something else. Distance. Space to breathe. Phoenix in late summer was unforgiving. The heat hung over the city like a weight. Ella found a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where the walls are thin, but the freedom is thick. And for the first time in years, she felt light. Not happy. Not yet. But light. Joshua stayed in the house. The big one with the garden she used to care for. Now the flowers were dying, and the grass had yellowed. He noticed, but didn't fix it. That was always Ella's touch. Life, beauty, color. Without her, the place looked like a shell. Just walls. Just space. Just nothing. But Joshua didn't leave either. Because sometimes men stay in broken things, hoping they'll fix themselves. Ella started walking every evening. No destination. Just movement. She'd pass strangers, smile softly, feel the wind on her face. She began listening to music again. Songs she hadn't played in years because they reminded her of a version of herself she thought had disappeared. Joshua? He worked longer hours, took up running, started drinking protein shakes and following motivational pages on Instagram. But at night, when the house got quiet, he'd sit on the couch, phone in hand, staring at her old coffee mug on the table. Still stained with cinnamon. Still hers. They didn't call each other. Not out of anger, but because they didn't know what to say. What do you say when you've already said everything? And yet, somewhere beneath the silence, there was something unspoken, a question neither dared to ask. Did we give up too soon? 2 months passed. The divorce papers came through. It was official now. No turning back. Ella signed them in the afternoon light, sitting at her small dining table. She didn't cry, just signed. Then, she sat there, hands still, heart pounding. Freedom doesn't always feel like wings. Sometimes it feels like falling. That night she went to a bar with her coworker Jenna. Nothing wild, just drinks, music, laughter. And for a moment, she let herself enjoy it. Until someone asked, "So, are you single?" She froze. What was she? Not married, not available, not ready. She just smiled and said, "Something like that." Joshua, meanwhile, met someone at work. Not romantically, just a conversation. A woman named Claire, who liked baseball and had a laugh that reminded him of Ella's, before it faded. She asked about his weekend. He said, "Nothing special." Then he paused, because he couldn't remember the last time he had a weekend that felt special. One evening, Ella passed by their old house, on purpose. She told herself it was just coincidence, but her feet knew where they were going. She slowed down when she saw the porch light on. There was no car in the driveway. She almost walked up, almost knocked on the door. Almost, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "I hope you're okay," and walked away. Neither of them had done anything wrong. Neither had cheated. Neither had screamed. But in that strange, sad way, that made it harder. There was no villain. No fight to fix. Just a quiet end. A love that forgot how to live. The holidays came, not like they used to. No shared tree. No matching pajamas. No cooking together. No silly dancing in the kitchen. Just silence. Ella went to her sister's house in Tucson. She brought wine, played with her nieces, smiled in the photos. Everyone told her how strong she looked. But strength is strange, isn't it? Sometimes it looks like survival, other times like pretending. Joshua stayed in Phoenix. He didn't decorate, didn't visit anyone. On Christmas Eve, he stood outside in the cold. Yes, even Phoenix gets cold. And watched the stars. He remembered their first Christmas together. Ella had burned the turkey. They ordered pizza and laughed until their cheeks hurt. Now, even the stars felt dimmer. In January, Ella tried dating. Jenna had convinced her to make a profile. Her first date was with a man named Mark. He wore loafers with no socks and talked a lot about crypto. Halfway through dinner, she realized she didn't want to be there. Not because Mark was awful, he wasn't, but because no part of her was ready to open again. Joshua saw Claire again at work. She invited him to a charity event. He said yes. He wore a suit Ella once picked out. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. Claire laughed at his jokes, asked questions, smiled a lot. And still, she wasn't Ella. He knew it wasn't fair. Claire was lovely, kind. But the heart doesn't care about fairness. It remembers who it loved, even after it forgets why. Weeks passed. Life moved forward. Or at least it pretended to. One Sunday morning, Ella woke up early. She made coffee, stood by the window, and stared out at the empty street. And out of nowhere, she missed him. Not just his voice or his touch. She missed how he used to make up songs while brushing his teeth. How he'd leave sticky notes on the fridge with little hearts. How he'd always warm up her side of the bed in winter. She didn't miss the silence. She didn't miss the distance, but she missed him. She reached for her phone, scrolled through his number, stared at it, but didn't press call. Joshua, miles away, stood in the cereal aisle at the grocery store. He picked up Ella's favorite granola, out of habit, then paused. Stood there for what felt like minutes. He remembered how they used to shop together, arguing over brands, laughing over coupons. And now, he was alone, holding granola for a woman who didn't live with him anymore. He put it back on the shelf. Later that night, Joshua opened his laptop. He typed Ella's name into his email. Just her name. Then stopped. What was he going to say? Hi, I miss you. Hi, I'm lonely. Hi, can we undo everything? Instead, he shut the laptop. But the feeling didn't go away. The next weekend, fate did something unexpected. At a small bookstore in Midtown Phoenix, Ella walked in looking for a poetry collection. Joshua walked in 5 minutes later, needing a gift for his coworker. And there, in front of the fiction section, they saw each other. He blinked first. She smiled second. They didn't hug, didn't cry. They just stood there, stunned, silent. Then sat down on a bench outside with 2 coffees and no plan. They talked, not about lawyers or leases, not about what went wrong, just life, the weather, their jobs, the new bakery near Roosevelt Street. They laughed. For the first time in a long time, they laughed. When it was time to leave, there was a pause. A long one. Ella looked at him. Do you ever wonder, she started, voice soft, what we could have been if we'd held on just a little longer? Joshua looked down, then said quietly, I wonder that every day. They didn't exchange numbers. Not out of anger, not even out of fear, but because something inside both of them whispered, this is as far as we go. Ella walked home from that bookstore in a haze. Every step echoed with old memories. His laugh still rang in her ears. The way he stirred his coffee with his finger. Still the same. His eyes. Still familiar. And yet, he was different now. Older. Tired in a way that couldn't be fixed with sleep. She closed the door to her apartment that night and sat on the floor in the dark. What hurt the most was not losing him. It was knowing she could see him again, and it still wouldn't change anything. Joshua, meanwhile, drove home in silence. The roads were wide and empty. The radio stayed off. He looked at the passenger seat where she used to sit. Her laugh used to fill that space. Now it was just air. He made dinner, didn't eat it, poured a glass of wine, left it untouched. And as he stood by the kitchen window, staring into the night, he whispered, maybe we were just meant to be a memory. Weeks passed, then months. They didn't bump into each other again. No more bookstore surprises, no unexpected calls, just life. Ella focused on work. She became the go-to editor at the magazine, respected, sharp, efficient. But when she came home, the apartment always felt colder than when she left it. She started volunteering at a shelter on weekends. Holding abandoned dogs in her arms somehow helped with the ache in her chest. Joshua took on extra projects. He ran every morning, went to therapy on Thursdays, even joined a community group, but nothing stuck. Not really. They both tried to move forward. But grief doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums beneath your skin. Soft, constant, unrelenting. They had grieved each other while still alive. And maybe that was the hardest kind of loss. Years passed. 3, then 4. Ella's hair got shorter. Joshua's beard went gray at the edges. They both changed, but in ways no one else could really see. Ella had chances. Men who asked her out. One even brought her flowers. But every time she tried to let someone in, something in her would close. Not out of loyalty to Joshua, not out of bitterness, but because her heart had known something once, and it didn't want to settle for less. Joshua traveled more, took up photography. He stood in front of mountains, oceans, cities. But the most honest photo he ever took was one of his empty living room. A single chair, a lamp, a book left open. He titled it, Stillness. On Ella's 42nd birthday, she sat alone on her balcony, watching the Phoenix sunset bleed across the sky. She had wine, music, a small cake she bought for herself. She took a photo of the view and thought, I wonder if he'd still love this sky the way I do. But she didn't send it. She didn't even write it down. Because time had done what it always does. It hadn't healed, but it had dulled the edges. Their love had become a soft scar, no longer bleeding, but always there. And some nights, especially the quiet ones, Ella would wake up and swear she heard his voice, calling her name. Just once, just softly. Joshua, too, had moments. Driving past the park where they once walked their dog, opening a book and finding her handwriting in the margins. They were everywhere and nowhere all at once. Not ghosts, not lovers, just echoes. In time, neither of them mentioned the other anymore. Friends stopped asking. Family stopped hoping. It was just known. They weren't angry. They weren't broken. They were simply two people who had once held everything, and then let it go. For good. And if this story moved you or even made you think, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone. And this story is a work of fiction. All characters, names, and situations are entirely made up and are not based on real individuals. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental.